The frock coat sleeve cuff. Here is a short tutorial to help you sew the frock coat sleeve cuff. To get to this point, you will have followed the boxy jacket tutorial. The basic construction is identical. I planned to have a vent opening at the cuff, but it is much easier to use this simple method, which looks the same when turned back. These are the main pieces for the sleeve and cuff, and this is the lining. So starting with the lining, I have stitched both seams and pressed them open. I have turned up and basted the seam allowance, but don't press. It is easier to slip stitch a soft fold rather than a crease. We will come to that later. Next, join the undersleeve and the top sleeve along the front sleeve seam. Press the seam open. This is now stitched. So working right sides together, these dots are where the back seam stitching will end. This is the cuff piece. I've interfaced it. This dot is aligned to the seam line, so line up the pieces and stitch all the way around, from edge to edge. This is now stitched. Trim from this side to reduce the bulk at the seam. Remove excess seam allowance from the seam here. I will trim from between the dots. It is good practice to always grade or stagger when trimming away seam allowance. This avoids having your seam allowance showing as a step or bump close to your finished edge. Snip V-shaped notches around the curve and turn through, pushing out the curve as you press, encouraging the seam to the sleeve side, so that it is out of sight when the cuff is turned back. This is a useful tool for pushing out curves and corners. I'm inclined to use whatever sharp tool I have to hand. So right sides together, I will stitch the back sleeve seam, match the double notches and dots. I will do my best to stitch all the way to the dot. If you find that difficult, you can hand stitch the last little bit. I did manage to machine all the way to the dot by pushing the cuff pieces out of the way. Loosely tack the cuff to the front sleeve seam allowance. Now for the sleeve lining, which is turned right side out and slipped over the sleeve so that they are wrong sides together. Line up the seams. Pin the lining to the cuff so that the lining fold lines up with the cuff stitching line. You can see that the lining is a little longer than the sleeve. This is the ease necessary for the sleeve to hang naturally. The lining will find its own level, creating a small tuck at the cuff. So slip stitch in place. That is now done. I can now turn the sleeve right side out. Turn back the cuff. Give it a press. And stitch on a covered button, or a nice antique button, such as this. Continue with setting in the sleeve and adding shoulder pads by following the boxy jacket tutorial. I hope you found this useful. Download patterns from angelakane.com. All my sewing tutorials are free, and that includes my in-depth pattern drafting lessons. Thank you very much for watching this video.